name's Garrett Lang. I'm a software developer turned software inventor. I live in North Jersey. I'm now an entrepreneur. My hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy, which has led me to create the Freethinker Institute, where we can all share knowledge and wisdom with each other. And I'm the executive director of the FTI, which we say for short. And the FTI is a not-for-profit looking to support and empower members by helping us each be the best version of ourselves, to seek truth and to be fair while always being polite. And we do that through transformational personal and professional development. We have free events like this one every Tuesday covering a wide range of topics not typically covered in academia or industry, but that are still intellectually interesting. And then we have weekly members only events for people who apply to be a member, where we apply practical wisdom into our daily lives. Um, Often relating to the five intentions, which are the kind of values of the FTI. I'll share a Google Doc for people that want to learn more about the organization in the chat in just a second. Actually, I'll do it now so that I get it done. Um, Learn more about the FTI here. And we have online communities in WhatsApp, Discord, and so you can learn more about us there. We also have a YouTube channel where our old events are up and able to be viewed. Um, and we have in-person events in North Jersey and New York City on a regular basis. So if you are interested, if you're in either of those areas, you can email me. I just put my email in the chat as well, and I can invite you to those. We also have a mailing list for these events, the Zooms. So if you want to be added to that, you can email me for that as well, and we'll add it to your calendar. We have only one rule in the FTI, and I'm going to ask everyone to follow it tonight, like I do every night, and that is to remain polite. That keeps us in the logical portion of our brain, so that we don't get what's called emotionally hijacked, where our emotions like pull us away from our rational selves and our thinking selves. And a lot of times discussions digress to that. That doesn't really happen here, because as soon as someone starts to get into the emotional part of the brain, we moderate, and it doesn't happen often, believe it or not, even though we've covered topics as incendiary as abortion and the wars in Palestine and Ukraine. And these are very heated topics that people usually get very emotional about, but we actually had very most almost entirely logical arguments about both of those. You can see them on YouTube. So we pride ourselves on trying to do what we call listening to understand, where if you disagree with someone, you have a lot more to learn by saying, well, why did you come to that conclusion? And listening with empathy or listening to understand, than you do by saying you're wrong and I'm right and this is why. We don't learn from that. We learn much more by listening with empathy or listening to understand. So that said, I'll encourage everyone to do that in the Q&A portion. But for now, I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started with the presentation. All right, so I mentioned earlier, but now we have a larger group, so I'll re-mention that I presented my logical argument defending reincarnation at a prior event. Basically, I was told, "Hey, this has been studied by science, and there's peer-reviewed research on reincarnation." And it turns out, actually, not only there are thousands of studies. Maybe it was in the tens of thousands. I forget the exact number, but it's at least thousands of studies covering reincarnation. So it's been very studied by science. And so I'm going to cover a small, segment of that, which is covered by a meta study of the studies, looking for the highest quality studies that were done that meet the criteria of the meta study. So I also am going to talk about whether or not it matters, and I would argue whether or not we reincarnate does not matter to everybody. It only matters to certain people, and I'll explain who I think it matters to. Um, and basically, um, I think that it does, like what I'm going to present will challenge a lot of the ideas put forward by a lot of religions about what happens after death, although it agrees with some religions, but I don't have 100% agreement with any religion in what I'm proposing here. So I think it's at least a little bit novel, although bits and pieces agree with like Buddhism and Hinduism in terms of the idea that people reincarnate. So that said, let's get quickly to the agenda. We're going to talk about well, I already covered the FTI. Then we're going to go into peer-reviewed research on reincarnation. Then I'm going to give the logical argument defending reincarnation. And untitled, I'm going to mute you because I don't think you meant to be off mute. I'm going to give a logical argument defending reincarnation, and then I'm going to talk about whether or not this matters to us individually. So, let's talk about a definition of what reincarnation means. It's always nice to start with a definition so we are all talking about the same thing. It's the transfer of life force or conscious stream from one human being to another human body. I'm actually going to use the term even more broadly and say that it could be transferred to another and like entity. So like, I think that human beings could get reincarnated as dogs and vice versa depending on where we are on our spiritual journey and what we did in our last life. But so I'm kind of going to use that slightly broader definition. But if you don't like that, feel free to discard it and just stick with the more narrow definition of from one human to another. Um, and then the idea is that across different lifetimes, that same consciousness or the essence of ourselves, what I call the spirit, exists in multiple bodies. And with that, I'm going to talk about belief in reincarnation is actually much more widely believed than I thought it was. Um, and which is interesting because it really is something that you kind of get teased if you believe in reincarnation. And so this is one of those things that is actually it's probably the thing that's the most widely believed that I think people are the most embarrassed to talk about. And so I want to get some statistics out there that it's a central component of a lot of religious systems, or a number of religious systems, and across different cultures, and it's highly believed. So Mexicans, 76% believe in the afterlife. South Africans, 73%. Canadians, 72%, which I found interesting. Indians, 65%. Iranians, 98%. Japanese, 51%. And it includes 46 to 60% of people with no religious affiliation that also believe in reincarnation, 27% of Western European citizens, and 20% of Eastern. And according to the Pew Research Center, belief in reincarnation is amongst the Western European countries has an average of 20%, with a minimum rate of 15% in Germany and a maximum of 31% in Portugal. And among those who describe themselves as spiritual but not religious, which includes me, by the way, I'm spiritual but not religious. 38% believe in reincarnation. This belief is also widespread in Latin American countries.
Sorry to cut you off. I don't want to throw an elbow at you, but I'm new here. Nice to meet you. I'm Hitch. How you guys doing?
So he was a
Hi,
spammer.
can you hear me? Sorry,
There's another one.
just joining in. Wait, what do you mean?
Sorry, we have to make sure that we clear the room of spammers when they jump in. So what these guys do is they put it up on their YouTube channels and they try to make money by Zoom bombing people's events. And this is their desperate plea at getting internet famous. It's really unfortunate, and I always offer them some free life coaching, but today I just decided to knock them out a little bit faster. So so more than 20% of Latin American countries believe in afterlife, 23% of Dominican Republic to 51% in Panama, 37% in Brazil believe in reincarnation, 18% have doubts about it, and 44% do not believe in reincarnation. So it's actually a minority that simply don't believe it's true, which I found fascinating. Now, I'm going to talk about a particular study that I focused on, because there's so much there in studies that I looked for a good solid meta study, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about the statistics of the meta study and what it covered. For those that don't know, a meta study is just a study of studies. So you take a large number of studies and you try to look for what's the commonality across all of them. That way, you're not looking at a very small sample size that might not be statistically significant. You're looking at a large sample size that is statistically significant, and you'll see that it comes from a diverse set of researchers. While there is one fatal flaw that I'll talk about because I like to poke holes in my own arguments, I think one of the things that science doesn't do very well is give the flaws of the reasoning that someone presents. They always want to make it look airtight, even if it's not airtight. And I think giving a realistic sense of doubt is important to having integrity. So I will do that, and I'll point out the one fatal. It's not a fatal flaw, I don't think, but it is one flaw of the studies, and I'll invite people to try to patch that hole. Um, there have been studies in Africa, Brazil, India, Sri Lanka, Turkey, Europe, the US. So this meta study covers, a bunch of different researchers with different academic backgrounds, including anthropologists, psychologists, psychiatrists, and others. So it covers a wide range of cultures. So this is one of those things that you can't say, well, East Asians always believe in reincarnation, so that's why this, turns out to be shown in these studies because you have all across the world samples from people all across the world and really mostly children, which I'll go into later. So there were 78 studies chosen from 1,784 studies on past life memories using industry standard methodologies for meta studies. Now, these are just the most prolific and cited people that created the studies. Dr. Stevenson, Dr. Ian Stevenson is the most well known. Studies have been done by a lot of people, though, a lot of different people as the primary investigator, the person who led the study. I do think that, most of these people, if not all of them, have had some interaction with Dr. Stevenson because he is kind of the foremost expert. So everybody goes to him to say, well, how did you do this? And what can I learn from you? But I think it would be nice, and so most of the people that are studying it do believe that there could be reincarnation. They have an open mind, that there could be reincarnation, and then they're studying it with that open mind. I think it would be fun to see some skeptics study it that come in trying to prove it wrong, and then we can get some real definitive evidence about whether or not, even the skeptics can be convinced if they can't come up with an explanation for the sort of people that they're encountering in their study. And I will argue that if the stories are right that I'm going to share later here, then I can't think of another explanation other than reincarnation. So, um, next, studies were looked at in 20 different over 20 different I think 20 different publications. So it's not just one publication or a set of editors that have an agenda to prove reincarnation. This is a wide range of academic journals that have published these studies. So there is a lot of diversity there in the people that were reviewing the studies in order to get let them be published. Now, children were the most studied. I think it was 84% of studies included, interviews with children. And the reason is because children 2 to 7 have the most credible past life experiences. And very often their memories fade as they mature into adolescence. Young minds really haven't developed the elaborate fantasy mechanisms at the age that most of these children were interviewed. And so they also lack exposure to historical details that they spontaneously describe. So that makes them perfect subjects to study because, if they were just making things up, those things wouldn't really exist in reality. But what happens is it sounds like the child is making something up, but if you actually take them seriously and not just say, oh, yeah, you're just making that up, and you actually research the things that the child describes, and I'm going to go into a few specific examples of this, turns out the things that they're saying happened to them actually did happen to someone that meets all the descriptions, even down to the remembering of names from the alleged past lives. So children often display emotional reactions and phobias connected to their claimed past lives. So if someone drowned in their past life, then they may be afraid of water, for example. And those patterns actually strengthen the case's credibility significantly. So, sorry, I think I had a duplicate slide there. So, methods for investigating these studies include interviews with the subject, his or her parents and relatives, and other firsthand witnesses, as well as the alleged previous life personalities, relatives, and analysis of documents, objects, photographs, and all kinds of available records. Now, Interviews were done in 73% of the studies, often involving the subject, the child, usually, their current family, and sometimes alleged previous family.
Oh,
Documented analysis. Matvi, I'm going to mute you, assuming that you're not a Zoom bomber, and that you just didn't mean to be off mute. But we'll see. Um, Case studies were the most common study design, accounting for 60% of the research, focusing 84% of the time on children who claimed past life memories. Now, there were unusual behaviors that were verified, like the phobias and something called xenoglossy, which I had to look up, but that's basically when you speak a language that you never learned in this life. I mean, that's a pretty hard one to understand. How can a 2 to 7 year old child speak a language that they never had exposure to in this life? I've even heard examples of people speaking languages that no longer exist, Native American languages, that are no longer spoken on Earth. But um, I didn't research those in this presentation. It's just stuff that I've read about. And then also having unusual skills. They also have lots of recordings of birthmarks or birth defects that match wounds from a previous life. I'll go into an example of that. That are sometimes present on the child. Documentation of the child's statements that were made before the case was solved is an important factor in the strength of the cases in this meta study. So basically, what that means is the child said, I have this and this memory, and they document all the memories of the child without having researched whether or not any of those things are true. Then they go off, they research whether or not those things are true, totally independent, without the child ever having had exposure to any of the research that they do. And it turns out that all of the little data points that the child gave turn out to triangulate on an actual person's life, sometimes things that you just can't make up. At least I can't think of a way that a child would be able to make up the name of, you know, two people, one of whom died and one of whom was their close friend, which we'll go into, um, and other details about the person's life. So, their parents, they also look at they also try to that basically eliminates the possibility that the children, the parents, or the friends or other first-hand witnesses could have gotten information through some sort of communication with the members of the alleged previous family, because they don't even know who the previous family was, because no one knew who the previous family was until the researchers that are doing the study actually looked up the data and tried to triangulate what like data points, like does this meet that actually match a person's actual life. So next, trends in the studies. Some of the studies have been replicated and their findings are relatively consistent, which makes it so that you can point out typical patterns of the cases. Basically, children usually start to make statements about a previous life then when they're about 35 months. 20% make statements concerning the interval between the two lives, called intermission memories, and the interval between death and rebirth showed a median of 16 months. So 16 months between when the past life died and then the new child is born. 75% describe the mode of death of the past life with accuracy. 35% show phobias related to an unnatural mode of death. And other common features were philias, things that you're attracted to, skills not learned, so children that just have a natural talent at something that the past life was good at. Maybe you're a really good musician, and the person in the past life was also a good musician. Unusual behaviors, birthmarks, birth defects, I mentioned, and then statements related, especially with the last year of the alleged person's previous life. Their own name and names of people that they knew, as well as places where they had been and lived. So let's give some examples. The case of a murdered child, and basically, what happened is there was a 3-year-old child that says they were killed. This was in a culture that believed in reincarnation, and so the parents actually took them seriously, and the child remembered the name of the alleged murderer, pointed it out. The alleged murderer denied it, and at first, but then the child said, "I'll show you where the body is buried." The 3-year-old child walked to a place and said, "Dig here." they dug, they found a body of someone that had gone missing, a number of years earlier and had an axe blow to the head. And then he said, I'll show you where the weapon is. This is a 3-year-old child, remember. He goes to another place in the ground, points to that, and they dig up the axe. Confronted with the axe and the body, the person that was the alleged accuser completely, broke down, turned pale white, and just said, "All right, I did it. I was the one that killed him." And admitted that he was the murderer. So that kind of it, how do you make that up? Like, how does a 3-year-old child point to an unmarked grave that no one knew about, no one living knew about? So, um, Jeff, I'm gonna mute you. I don't think you meant to be off mute. So that was the first case. The next case is a young child who at 2 years old started having nightmares and would scream, "Airplane crash on fire. Little man can't get out," thrashing his legs in bed, right? A 2-year-old child having these like nightmares, basically. He would obsessively slam toy airplanes into a coffee table, repeating crash on fire" themes, saying that the airplane was crashing, right? My kids didn't do stuff like that, right? It wasn't about crashing airplanes. It was about flying airplanes if they were doing that. It was my daughters, but they didn't have like, murderous ends to their games with that, the playing that they did when they were 2 and 3 years old. So some specific statements that this young man made. His name was James Leninger. He said he flew a Corsair. I didn't even know what a Corsair was when I was 2 or 3 years old. I didn't know until I read the story. I didn't know that a Corsair was even a type of plane. So it was actually true that the alleged past life that they connected this with, the man's name was Houston. He actually flew Corsairs earlier in his career, although when he died, he was flying a different plane. He did fly Corsairs. There was an aircraft carrier name, and the child mentioned the name Natoma, which was an aircraft carrier that this World War II fighter was flying off of. The father was later discovered to be the USS Natoma Bay, which is a World War II aircraft carrier. He also gave the name of his friend, Jack Larson. Well, there is a Jack Larson that served on the Natoma Bay and flew missions at the same time Houston did. The location of death, when shown a map of Iwo Jima, James pointed and said, "That's where my plane was shot down." I mean, what a weird thing to say as a 2 or 3-year-old child, to say my plane was shot down there, and Houston was actually shot down during a strike in that same area. So it was accurate. Details about the crash, he said he was shot in the engine and crashed into the water, which his plane was hit in the engine and crashed into the sea. That's pretty detailed to just make it up and have it match, literally with these names and this data. Now, there's a thing about statistics that's worth noting. When you have numerous things that happen that all align with each other, the statistics that all of them are like that, if they overlap with each other, the statistics that all of them are off, become really infinitesimally small. The more different events that triangulate to agree with something, the more almost undeniable that thing is. And you're seeing a lot of different data points that, aren't things that you could just make up and guess. James referred to the pilot as me or James. And the World War II pilot's name was James M. Houston. And so he had the same name. Drawings, James drew hundreds of World War II battle scenes and always signed them as James III, which he explained as meaning he was the third James, possibly because Houston was James Jr. Um, Important strength of the case includes many of James' statements were recorded or noted before Houston's identity was discovered, like we talked about before, reducing the chance of any memory contamination or parental suggestion. Um, the investigators found that James's parents initially knew nothing about Houston or Natoma Bay, so they couldn't have fed this data to the child. The researchers, including Dr. Jim Tucker, concluded that Fraud was very unlikely. There was no incentive early on because the family initially avoided publicity entirely. Fantasy imagination didn't fit the persistent trauma-like symptoms like nightmares and compulsive play. Normal learning like TV, books, and relative couldn't explain it because there was no known material about Houston that was available. He wasn't like on a PBS show or anything like that. He wasn't a famous person. He was just another fighter pilot that got shot down in World War II. So reincarnation was seen as the most plausible explanation for the knowledge that James displayed. Next, I'm going to encourage everyone to research this topic for yourselves after tonight. If you're curious and inquisitive, look it up, right? Go to scholar.google.com. There are thousands of studies on reincarnation. Read them and see if you can come up with an explanation of the types of things that these studies have come up with, um, and I wasn't able to, so I couldn't come up with a better alternative hypothesis. Although we'll see in the Q&A if someone's got a creative possibility. So you can also Google the science of reincarnation, and there's pop culture. I think like Vice has an article about reincarnation, and there are pop culture magazines have actually written about reincarnation, which I think is actually quite bold of them considering that this is usually something that gets laughed out of the room if it's even brought up, even though so many people actually believe in it, which we learned about. If you're feeling really adventurous and skeptical, try to create your own study, right? And I'm all about like, exploratory knowledge and, trying to look into this in a realistic basis if you're in a position to be able to do that. So, next, I'm going to talk about my logical argument defending reincarnation. So that's the end of the peer-reviewed research. Now I'm going to come up with a logical hypothesis defending reincarnation from first assumptions, from base assumptions, basically things that we would assume to be true, and then from those very base assumptions, coming up with a logical argument defending reincarnation. So the first is that I believe we have, well, I'm going to just go through these at a very high level. Each one of these has a logical defense for it that has been another presentation topic of another night. But if you're interested in the argument defending free will, it's on our YouTube. And it was one of the most well-attended sessions we had. Although I screen shared the wrong screen, so I apologize for that. I'll probably end up redoing it again because of that. But either way, the argument is there if you can follow it verbally. Um, if we do have free will, meaning the ability to make non-deterministic decisions, then there has to be, according to the argument that I make, there has to be an essence of that free will, which is non-physical. And it's based on the way that I make the argument defending free will that turns out to be an implication, which is part of why I was saying earlier before everyone joined that I kind of happened upon this argument defending reincarnation. It wasn't something I was even looking for. It's just that's where, as I was unpacking what I learned about free will from my essay, which was the second philosophical essay that I ever wrote. I have over 200 written now. Basically, that we have what I call a spirit, which is the non-physical essence of ourselves. And I think it's very unlikely that a metaphysical spirit, which is the name for something non-physical, would be a one-time use thing. That just seems like highly implausible that this metaphysical thing would be like use it once, one and done, throw it away sort of thing. So I think this argument combined with the scientific evidence makes it so that reincarnation is the more likely thing to believe than not. That said, we're the Free Thinker Institute. Everyone's allowed to come to their own decisions. I would never tell any of you to believe my judgment over your own. If my argument is convincing, great, believe it. If you don't find it convincing, great, don't believe it. So that said, I'm going to go into this argument in a little more detail. I basically made, I believe, a pretty solid argument that we have libertarian free will, which means that we can make non-deterministic decisions, which means that our decisions are not the solely the result of the laws of physics. Yes, the laws of physics play into what we can and can't do, but they are not the sole determinant of what we do. And we do intuitively feel we make decisions, and I would argue that that impression is actually reflective of reality. And the very simple argument defending free will, and this was a 1 hour presentation that I'm trying to summarize into 2 bullet points. There's something called Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which basically says that if you have a logical set of rules, you have assumptions and a logical set of rules that of what you can infer from those assumptions, that one of two things is true. Either it's consistent, meaning that everything, how do I say this? It's either consistent, meaning everything you prove true is true, or it's incomplete, meaning it's consistent and incomplete, meaning that there are things that are true that your logical system can't prove true, or it's complete, but it's inconsistent, meaning it can prove true everything that's true, but some of the things it proves true are false. Now, what I did is I said, well, if you take the entire universe, no matter how big you think it is, and I think, a good argument that the universe is actually infinite, that we don't, that our viewable universe is only a small corner of an infinitely large universe. But whether you believe in that or not, take the universe at its complete size. If you take all the mass energy at the current moment in time t, and you move forward a tiny little fraction of time, if all the mass energy and the laws of physics can deterministically prove everything about the next moment in time, then it's what's called a perfect black box, meaning it's proved true everything that is true in the universe if you're a physicalist and you believe that only physical things exist and that non-physical things are just fiction, then that basically violates Gödel's incompleteness theorem, because you now have a logically consistent system that proves true everything that's provable to be true, meaning every piece of mass energy in the universe at every moment, at the current moment in time, getting from that to the next moment in time is basically like rules of inference that get us from time t to t plus a tiny little bit of time, which we call delta t in physics. So that's the very quick summary. Again, it's a 1 hour argument, and I'm trying to summarize it. So if you're not convinced, I won't be offended. But I would encourage you, if you don't find that convincing, to watch the full video in the YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search for Freethinker Institute Free Will, it'll come up and talk about free will, determinism, etc. And there's a pretty good argument against determinism, which says that the laws of physics are the only thing that determine the future, which has been all but disproven by accepted science. And then there's a pretty good argument, I think, that's even more solid, that free will, libertarian free will is what it's called, that we make non-deterministic decisions, is true. So, if that's true, then there must be something else helping us make those non-deterministic decisions. And I would argue that our intuition about that, and there's sort of two possibilities. Either it's random and we think that it's free will, but randomness has disguised itself as free will, where we think we're making these decisions, but really all our decisions are random. And I would argue that's pretty unlikely, because we're very good at recognizing randomness when we observe the universe. If someone puts up a random number generator on a computer and puts those numbers up and, starts showing them, by the way, those number generators are generally not actually random. They're algorithms. They're just like convoluted that you can't really tell what the patterns are with a human mind. But even then, they'll appear random, and we'll be able to observe them and say these appear random. Now, when we make our decisions, it doesn't feel random at all, right? We feel like we're deciding what we're going to do. And I would argue, between the idea that randomness is disguising it as free will, which there's no evolutionary advantage of disguising randomness as free will. So I would argue it's more likely true that free will is real and we actually do make our decisions. And it's the essence of ourselves that I call the spirit, that religions call a soul, that is the thing that's choosing what we're going to do. Now, the spirit isn't physical, so it's not part of that logically consistent set of rules that I was talking about, where the universe at time t plus delta t and t plus delta t is coming about. So this puts me into a category that I used to think was ridiculous, which is called dualism, where you believe that there's physical stuff and then there's non-physical stuff. I used to think the idea that there was non-physical stuff was crazy until I could logically defend it. And that's why I think it's important not to use emotional arguments and say, hey, that's a crazy idea. Just say, I don't think I understand why you believe that, and ask people thoughtful questions about why they believe what they believe. And some will have good reasons, and a lot will have not good reasons. I'd argue we're all stuck in confirmation bias, and we want to believe we're right about what we currently believe. And we had a whole event on confirmation bias in the FTI. You can find that on YouTube too. So, but I would argue those of us aware that we have confirmation bias and that acknowledge that we do have it far less than the people who don't even know what it is and aren't looking out for it in themselves. So, where could a metaphysical spirit come from? I would argue that it can't really evolve from a deterministic physical universe because it's a non-physical thing. How do you get something non-physical from a physical universe? So basically, and this is where I talk about God, not the Abrahamic God. I think Epicurus did a really good job proving that the Abrahamic God can't exist. It's called the problem of evil, where he says, if God is benevolent and all powerful, why would he not just prevent evil from happening? And I think I made a pretty good argument that Epicurus was right about that. So what I believe is that there is a, a type of God that is the source of the metaphysical spirit. And at some point in life, I believe in evolution. I think that at some point, life on Earth was complex enough to be able to contain a spirit, and God or someone delegated to by God put the spirit into the life form at a very early stage. And that's where non-deterministic decisions started to be made because, you know, I do think that physical objects that are not alive, alive is the wrong word, but I think some things have a spirit and some things don't. A rock doesn't have a spirit, right? It doesn't make decisions, doesn't make non-deterministic decisions. It's very predictable. Whereas a person has a spirit. And Gene, we will open up to questions, but by general, you can keep your hand up, Gene, and then you'll be the first in line. So everyone's welcome to put hands up, but I'm going to call hands after the presentation is over. That was by demand. I used to take questions along the way, but people said they had trouble following the argument of the presentation. So now we take questions at the end, which I don't like, but I'm going to go with what's popular, not what I want. Um, so I would argue that then you could ask, well, why did God create spirits? And I would argue God created spirits to increase the happiness and decrease the harm in the universe. And there's a net positive if you have happy beings that are not suffering from a lot of harm, then that's a good thing. That makes the universe more meaningful. A spirit is actually part of what makes life meaningful, is that we make these non-deterministic decisions and we can learn along the way. So I would say that I think God expects us to try to increase happiness and decrease harm for those we can influence. That's the fourth intention includes that after preventing significant unnecessary harm from happening to all people. And the remember the five intentions are the values of the FTI. So learning how to do that, I would argue, is a purpose of life that I think is expected of us and probably feels intuitive to most of us to say, hey, more happiness is good, less harm is good. Why not, right? That's aligned pretty carefully or pretty closely with utilitarianism, which has probably been one of the philosophies that's done the most good in the world since um, Bentham created it, although I would argue Bentham didn't really create it. It actually started with Epicurus back in ancient Greece. Epicurus just gets a bad rap for people misunderstanding him, but really he was the first, in my opinion, um, utilitarian. So even if you don't believe in God, utilitarianism is very secularly grounded morality, and I don't really think God cares whether you believe in him or not. I think all that matters is that we're good people. And so even though I believe in God, I don't think it matters whether you do or not. What matters is that increasing happiness and decreasing harm is something that we should strive for so that we can make the world a more happy place for all of us to live in. So next, would a metaphysical spirit be disposable? If God gave us a metaphysical spirit, why would it be disposable in a one-time use thing? It's unlikely that God would give us eternal bliss or eternal damnation based on decisions made in a finite lifetime. So I would argue something has to happen to the spirit after death. And reincarnation feels like such a logical step to take if you're a compassionate God and you want souls to learn and grow. You give them lots of chances, an infinite number of chances even to keep learning and growing. And I would argue, while we don't remember what happened in our past life, I think our spirits either evolve or devolve. And I'll talk about the two options a little bit later when I get kind of woo-woo spiritual on you. Um, if reincarnation wasn't woo-woo enough, I'm going to talk about, well, what happens after death, right? So, given that I hypothesize God created spirits to increase happiness and decrease harm, I would argue that's what we're meant to do is to learn and grow from one life to the next. I think that the spirit is recycled, and after we die, we're reborn again. And the things that we didn't learn in this life, we get an opportunity to learn in our next life, to try to spiritually evolve, if you will. And until we learn the lessons that we have, we suffer. And I would argue most suffering comes from a lack of learning lessons. Once we learn those lessons, we start to have a lot more happiness and very little to no harm. I think true nirvana, as the Buddhists call it, or moksha, as the Hindus call it, would be a life of no harm. And I use the word harm instead of suffering, very intentionally. If people want to ask why I use that term instead, I can talk about it afterwards. There's a lot of philosophy behind it. So, since God is fair, I would argue the better we do at increasing happiness and decreasing harm in this life, the chances are good that we'll have more influence either in our next life or more often than not in this life as well, but definitely in the next life. Whereas I would argue if we increase ha harm and decrease happiness, then I would argue we have less influence on our next life, because we've devolved spiritually. So, how do we achieve the life of happiness with minimizing harm? I would argue that's what the five intentions are for. The first one I mentioned is to always be polite, use reason and intuition to be the best version of ourselves, to seek truth and to be fair. And I will describe what I mean by fair in the fourth intention. Second is to be transparent about your beliefs and share them with other people, and then listen to those people with an open mind so that you're understanding and learning from their reflections on what you've shared with them and learn how you can better achieve the first intention by being a better version of yourself, getting closer to truth and being more fair. Third is to hone your critical thinking skills so you can learn to rely on them. I would argue we should all rely on our own critical thinking skills first and foremost, which includes sometimes delegating to someone else who's more of an expert at something than us. Um, and that helps us better discern fact from fiction and wisdom from folly. Um, and then fourth is that we should prevent significant unnecessary harm from happening to all people, full stop, whenever we can influence it. And then we should increase happiness and decrease harm for ourselves and those we can influence, with a priority being on the people we can influence the most, because that's where we can have the biggest impact. So that, if anyone's not familiar with Singer's essay on famine, this kind of describes what he poses as a juxtaposition. It's a pretty famous essay in philosophy. And this actually, the fourth intention explains why he had a little bit of a misunderstanding about the argument he was putting forth. So if you lost that reference, don't worry about it. It's not super important. It's more for the philosophy folks. So, those that have read some academic philosophy. So, I would argue the fifth intention is that we all want to be loved. So, we should have an eagerness to give, receive, and reciprocate love, both platonic as well as romantic. Some people are good at giving it and not receiving it. Some are good at receiving it and not giving it. And some can do both but don't reciprocate. I would argue we're at our best when we give, receive, and reciprocate love. We all want to be loved, like I said, so why not give, receive, and reciprocate love? So, where will I be reborn? Well, if you go to our essay on the origins of the universe, or our presentation on the origins of the universe, I think the universe is infinitely big, and so this covers the question that Siri asked, which is, well, how could the number of souls be getting bigger? Well, actually, there's an infinite number of souls in an infinitely large universe across, time and space that is infinitely large. So yes, that means there are aliens, and a lot of people say, well, why? Well, I'm not going to go down that. We had another event on aliens, so we covered that one too, and had a guest who actually had a sighting of aliens that is from a person that I know personally, that was introduced to them and is not like an attention seeker at all. She was just sharing a personal experience she had in the 70s, and basically, if that's true, there is a chance that some of us will be reborn in another part of the universe, and that some of us were born in another part of the universe before this life. The name for that, someone that was like from another part of the universe and born as a human, is called a star seed. We had at the last event that we had on reincarnation, we had a woman named Celicia who claims that she is a star seed and that she actually remembers between her last life and now and described it. And it actually, she had videos of other people who described sort of a similar thing. And it's an interesting hypothesis. They basically say that some people get to choose like factors of their next life, like who their parents are, what their color of their skin is, their sex, and stuff like that. So, um, it was interesting. I'm still agnostic on that topic, but I really found it interesting to listen with empathy to what Celicia said, and I entertain the possibility that she could well be right, but I don't have a strong opinion on that because I can't like definitively. I haven't studied it and I haven't seen peer-reviewed research on it. So, does it matter if we reincarnate? So I would argue if you're a good person, following those five intentions, you're always polite, trying to be the best version of yourself, seeking truth and being fair, and you would rather do what's fair than do what's in your best interest, it doesn't matter whether or not you believe in reincarnation. The only people that really this matters to are the ones that think they're quote unquote getting away with something unethical. And I would argue we're not going to get away with anything. We reap what we sow, and that means that, basically, I don't think, by the way, there's a common belief that karma is there to punish us. And I don't think karma is there to punish us. It's not a punishment. What it is it's a lesson learned. And what happens is if we make mistakes, like mistakes around wisdom, and we confuse wisdom from folly, and we think that folly is wisdom and wisdom is folly, and we make bad decisions, and we put negativity out into the world, that negativity is very often reflected back to us or deflected from someone else to us. And so bad things tend to come back to us because we put negativity out into the world. So I don't think that's done as punishment. I think it's meant to teach us to absorb negativity when it comes to us and be resilient to that and actually return with empathy and compassion to other people. And, my when I'm at my best, and I don't do this all the time, but when I'm at my best, if someone's like, biting my head off, I'm going to ask them if they're okay. I'm going to say, is everything okay? Like, it seems like you're upset right now, right? Rather than me attacking them back and, pushing back on them, I'm going to like listen with empathy and make sure that that person is, because most people, when they're being very aggressive and mean, something bad happened to them, right? And they're going through a difficult time. And so coming from a place of empathy is much more of a learning the lesson that you need to learn at that time, which is don't fight back, just try to be helpful. And I like to say, if we don't help each other, who's going to help us? And when you say it that way, it's so obvious we need to be helping each other, but so rarely do people actually go out of their way to help others. Now it happens, and I would challenge each of us to say, how often do I go out of my way to help other people when I have the opportunity to do so? And I would say, whenever we can increase happiness and decrease harm, we should be trying to do it, and we should help each other. So that said, I think karma is about teaching moments, and the more we learn, the happier our life gets, and the less harm we experience. So that said, I already covered that. And so heaven and hell. So what about the concepts of heaven and hell? So I would argue that heaven is achieved when someone has learned everything they need to in this life. This is like almost no one ever achieves this sort of thing, right? It's moksha or nirvana in Buddhism, in Hinduism and Buddhism respectively. And it's when your life is nearly all happiness and you're almost never disappointed. You have almost no harm come to you because you're never disappointed by anything. You just learn lessons from things that don't go the way that you want. And in Stoicism, we call that a preferred indifferent, where we say, look, I couldn't control that, but something bad happened to me. I'm going to learn from it. That's it. And I like to say the only two uses of the past are to learn from it or to reminisce. If you're doing anything else with the past, like beating yourself up, which a lot of us do. I used to do it all the time. That's not useful. Learning the lesson from the past is what's useful. And if we go on to enjoy all the high points, and I do think we get to enjoy the high points. A lot of people say, and I had this misunderstanding about Buddhism, a lot of people think Buddhism means you shouldn't be attached to happiness, meaning you shouldn't enjoy the ups. I disagree with that completely. I think we should enjoy the high points, but we should learn from the low points and not be disappointed by them. That's a level of spiritual development that is ahead of most people, and I would call that, when we're always enjoying happiness and we're never being disappointed, that's heaven. And it's heaven on earth. And I think if we achieve that in this life, we go on to some more meaningful, life in our next life. Now, I'll give a quote about that a little bit later. So then what's hell? So I would argue hell is when we don't learn the lessons from the negativity that we put out and that comes to us. Hell is when we suffer. We don't learn the root cause of why we suffered. We don't learn the lessons that the suffering was meant to teach us. And instead of using suffering as a lesson learned, we act as a victim. We say that life is cruel and unfair, and we blame everyone but ourselves. Now, sometimes things that happen to us that are bad aren't our fault, but there's almost always, and in my experience, I think there always is a lesson to be learned from every bad thing that happens to us. Um, if we look for it. And so I would say, suppose that you ask a friend for favors on a regular basis, but when they ask you, you don't return any favors to them. Well, then they start saying they're unable to help you when you ask. The lesson learned is, as I said before, if we don't help each other, who will help us? And that's where, if you don't reciprocate, people are going to stop helping you. And so the idea of there's a lot of vilification of the idea of transactional help, and I understand why there is a place where it's not good or useful. Common wisdom says transactional is bad, but I think there's a misunderstanding about this, and I'll explain it. So in the case that I gave before, if other people help you and you don't ever help them back, that's really unfair. That's not fairness in a relationship. We all want to be treated fairly, so I would argue we should treat people fairly too. It doesn't mean that if they helped me 3 times, I will help them exactly 3 times. Now, that's transactional and it's not wise. But I would say that saying that's transactional and therefore I don't have to help back at all, they should help me with expecting nothing in return, is also not wise. What we should do is say, this person always helps me. I'm going to always help them whenever I can. And if you're possibly able to help them out, right? And then they help you when they can, and everybody's happy, right? And I feel very lucky to live in a community where we do that for each other. And it's just kind of the norm in our community. And I would argue that's not the norm. Like most of my life, I haven't lived in a community like that. My wife and I moved to our town because it is like that here, and we like that. Now, suffering from negativity, I like to say, keep your hopes high and your disappointment low. It's the only way to go. And I think this is true. When something negative happens to us, we can avoid suffering by simply saying, I'm going to learn the lesson from that. We all have bad luck. That happens. Let's suppose you have bad luck. Bird poops on your head one day, right? You can leave it there, have it ruin your day, and you can just get angry at everybody that you meet the whole day because you're so angry that you had this bad luck that a bird pooped on your head. Or you can laugh, say, what bad luck? And you wipe it off and you move on with your day as if nothing happened. Or you even tell your friends and laugh about it. And you look at it as a funny thing and not as a negative thing. Now, that's the case where, the lesson learned is simply to avoid disappointment. Just brush it off and don't let it make you be more negative. And I think one of the lessons we need to learn is to be able to absorb negativity and not reflect that negativity back to wherever the negativity came from, in this case, cursing the bird. And we also want to learn not to deflect that negativity, meaning the bird pissed me off today. And so now I'm going to be mean to everybody I meet all day because this bird just ruined my whole day. And so I'm going to ruin everyone's day I run into. That's not a good way to be either. So, next, if I reincarnate, should I wait until my next life to learn? This is one that I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding. They believe in reincarnation and they go, oh, well, I'll learn that problem. I'll learn that in my next life. Well, when you do that, you actually delay happiness. Why would you want to delay happiness? Why would you want to delay reducing your harm? So I would argue, take the bull by the horns, as the saying goes, and learn the lessons immediately. Like, starting after this discussion, learn every lesson you can from everything that happens to you in life and try to learn the lessons that you need to help increase happiness for yourself and the people you can influence. And if you do that, and if you want, the FTI is a community where we do that for each other and with each other. And we have a couple of members in the FTI here today that can probably vouch for that. And I'm going to put one more link. I'm going to put the link one more time in the chat and say, learn more about the FTI here. So that Google Doc has a lot of information about the FTI, including information about membership if you want to come to an event. You can come to a members event just as an observer. Just email me. My email is in the chat. It's Garrett, Garrett at freethinkerinstitute.org. And you can come as a guest and just see what it's like when we meet as members together. And members are like a group of usually 10 or fewer people where we get to know each other at a very deep level and we help each other in applying good philosophy to our lives and um, help each other towards achieving our life's goals. And some of the FTI pods have a purpose. I'm about to start an entrepreneurship pod. We may have a political activism pod at some point. There's some people that were interested in that. Um, we can't, as an organization, choose politicians. We are apolitical as an organization. We don't endorse any candidates, but we do share truthful information about people running for office, people in office, and I don't shy away from that. I think, the truth is important to share with everybody. And I try to find my version of the truth and try to share it with people. And I transparently share it with all of you. And then if some of you have a reason I'm wrong, I'm going to change my opinion and be more right than I was before. So that said, I don't think we should wait to learn the lessons we need to learn in this life. Um, and so, with that, I'm going to just quickly summarize basically the idea of reincarnation. Like I said, it often gets called pseudoscience. The truth is, it is science. It's been studied. There are large numbers, over 1,500, I think over 1,700 peer-reviewed studies on reincarnation. My logical argument defending reincarnation makes it even more likely that reincarnation is true. But as far as whether or not it's important, I would argue if you're trying to be polite, be the best version of yourself, seek truth, and be fair all the time and following the other four intentions, no, reincarnation isn't important. You're on the right path already anyway. And I don't think that whether or not you believe in reincarnation or whether you believe in God has anything to do with whether or not you end up in a better position in your next life. What matters is whether or not you do the right thing. And I think we all have innately a gut feel of what's right and wrong to do in given situations. And very often we're having to decide, am I going to do what's in my best interest or I'm going to do what's fair? And when you choose fair, you're choosing the right path. And I think people will reciprocate. And I've seen this in my life where I've been super fair with other people. They then become very trusted relationships because they see that I'll be more fair even when it's not in my best interest. And I could have taken advantage of a situation. And I point that out and I say, look, I could have said this, but I'm not going to. This is what reality is, and this is the fair thing to do. And I'm going to choose that over doing what's best for me. So and so the only time I think reincarnation matters is for people who think they're getting away with unethical things. Those Zoom bombers should go through the YouTube video on this afterwards, but I don't know if they will. I hope that they will at some point. They're young kids, so they have a lot to learn. I did pranks when I was a young kid too, so I have to admit. Um, so that said, I'm going to open it up to questions and I will share the link of the presentation. And I'm gonna, with the questions, we have a little bit of a caveat, which is limit comments or questions each time you raise your hand, limit it to one topic at a time. Spend less than 2 to 3 minutes to describe your comment or ask your question. And then if you want to respond to what someone just said, feel free to just jump in, but stay under 20 seconds in a response, like an immediate real-time response. And that way we can get conversational, even though we have a large group, we have 40 people here, but we can get conversational and we can all, sort of respond to what someone just said and get on that topic. And then after that conversation dies down, we'll go to the next hand and it'll be another 2 to 3 minute comment or question. And yeah. So um that said, Gene, you had your hand up first, so I would love to hear from you.
Um, well, originally I just had a question, but now I'd like to ask that question and quickly have your answer and then make a few other comments. Is that okay?
There's only one other hand up, so I'm going to ask you to ask the question first and then raise your hand again. You can raise your hand right now again because you put your hand down, and then you'll go right after Ariel. So ask the question first, and then
This one
Ariel will go, and then you can make your comments after Ariel.
to you was how do you define what is physical?
So physical is things made out of mass energy. So basically, a table is physical, the earth is physical. Like everything we see and observe, like is physical. If something is non-physical, it has no physical form whatsoever. It's not observable through any mechanism, whether it's like an instrument or anything. It's not physically observable. Does that make sense?
It doesn't it doesn't make sense and logically to me. But anyway, what inspired me is this book. I've had it for like since it came. I maybe have had it since for 20 or 25 years. I never read it till recently or started looking at it, but I got interested in something called a gluon, and
Hmm.
that's kind of a particle. And I don't know that much about it, but that's what sparked my interest. But basically, the Buddhist, the middle way school of Buddhism has these logical arguments against the existence of an external deity that created everything. And basically, I can't remember because I never was that interested in those arguments. But the basic idea of the concept of it is that if it has to be, everything's interconnected. So if it's interconnected, it would have to be physical. I mean, extending that God disapproval to disproving it. But to me, God, I don't diss other people's religions. God means different things to different people.
Yeah.
And at age 14, I devoted my life to what I called then touching God. And I never told anybody until the last 2 or 3 months of my life. Like, it was a deep secret, and it's inspired me my whole life, even though I've been an atheist since my mid 20s. The experience I had never changed. I never disavowed it, and it's been the groundwork of my whole life. So the soul thing. There are people who believe that one has to develop a soul, but then one would have to find a soul a little bit differently. But
Yeah.
spirit, to me, it's everything that exists. I'm a materialist. Everything that exists is physical. So
Yeah.
the spirit has to do with breath and with energy forces. And I
Yeah.
do think there's such a thing as reincarnation. I had a memory of, which I share if I stay in this group tonight. I've had a memory of a previous death, and I experienced a rebirth. I was on an acid trip. This is many years ago. I don't take much acid anymore, but so I think it's interesting. I think we need to inquire together. And the final thing I want to say is there's something in the middle way school of Buddhism. They really don't focus from this angle too much. It's called, they have afflictive obstructions, which is anger, greed, clinging, and that stuff. They focus from that angle. But there's also something called the knowledge obstruction, which that's where people get stuck from developing further. And that's my particular interest for the rest of my life, is studying that in myself and communicating about that to others, because the pain from childhood and the way we lie and develop creatively as children develop our defense structure, it also creates, or the tendency for there to be a knowledge obstruction. And I believe we all
Yeah.
are. Very hard to see it. There's a blind spot around that. So my heart goes out to all of us, including myself. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Shannon. I was a physicalist most of my life too, until I had this argument defending free will. So I would encourage you to watch the video where I defend free will, because if that argument is right, there's a follow-on video that I talk about spirituality, where if that argument defending free will is right, then there has to be non-physical things determining the future. It's just
I don't
something.
believe there's free will. They believe there's free will, and there's a middle thing between the two. I don't like this
It's
black and
called compatibilism, but compatibilism is still determinism. So it just says, you know,
white. There's creative contrivance. So a person, even though they may not, I'm not saying that I even believe that they don't have free will. If a person doesn't technically have free will, by contrivance, they still have the ability to be flexible and to move and to, harness the horse of their inclinations or mechanical inclinations and be
right.
more conscious. So
I would encourage you though to try to watch that video defending free will, because if you agree with that argument, I can give you an essay following on from that, which I think will show that there are non-physical elements controlling the future. Not controlling solely, but that are influencing the future, I should say.
it depends how we define physical. So thank you very
Yeah.
much.
I
watch it
think
if
the reason you didn't agree with my definition of what's non-physical is because you don't believe in anything non-physical. So, not physical for me. And I think that,
you
what's that?
a sincere question. I just was wondered. I wasn't even thinking about disagreeing or agreeing. I
Okay.
just be meaningful for you to believe in.
Well,
That's
I
fine.
would love when we get around to the hands for you to explain what part of my definition didn't make sense because physical to me is something that is detectable using either observation or an instrument, that there's some physical, there's some like it's an observable thing. Like it's physically observable, it's observable with the senses in some way, shape, or form, directly or indirectly. If there's
But
no way to observe it physically or like with an instrument or with the senses, then it's non-physical.
well, thank you. I'm in a state of question, and my question is more about gluons. So I'll
Yeah.
ask. My hand comes
Yeah.
around.
We'll go to that in the next time around. Ariel, thank you for your questions, Gene. Ariel, go ahead.
So I don't often share this. It's a highly personal thing for me. Um, but I'll go ahead. So at the age of 7, um, I experienced what I was told later when I became a Buddhist was Satori. Um, for some reason, when I was very young, it was very important for me to know where I came from. The question bothered me. And I remember sitting on my back porch and thinking about this. Where did I come from? I came from something, and I kept meditating on this. And I didn't know, of course, I was 7. I didn't know I was meditating. I just was thinking really hard. All of a sudden, it became very important. And this experience took me to a place where was no longer in my body, right? And I was at the precipice of something extraordinary. That's all I knew. Something very extraordinary. It was very dark, a little bit scary, but mostly just expecting something absolutely miraculous. But on the very point of entering that, the door was slammed. Boom. As I fell back into the present moment of my body and where I was sitting on the back porch, in my mind's eye, not the actual physical reality of staring at the tree that was in my backyard, but in my mind's eye, what appeared there was a leaf, very, very slowly, very extreme slow motion, falling from a tree. Okay. And then I opened my eyes, and I remember just before I opened my eyes, I could hear the leaves, falling on the ground because it was fall. And then I looked at the tree. And this perplexed me for many years. And I thought, did I just imagine that? Was I asleep? I could not figure it out. And I never talked about it for a number of years until, like I said, I was more educated in religion and became aware of reincarnation and meditation and things like that. And I was like, oh, wow, that's what that was. That must have been Satori. But I still, to this day, I have questions about what it actually meant. I think I was given the answer, but because I was so young, not the whole answer. But I think what I have taken from that is that we all come from something greater and bigger than us. I mean, you think of a leaf, just one leaf on a huge tree, okay? And I'll wrap this up because I realize I'm taking a lot of time with this. And I had some other points, but I'll get back in line with them.
Thanks.
But my point is that I've tried many times, especially since I've done yoga and stuff like that, to have that same experience, and I cannot capture it. It escapes me. But when I was younger, I did. And what I took away from that whole experience was that we come from something far bigger and greater than ourselves. And at this point in time, the reason the leaf was not falling quickly is because it wasn't dying. The reason that that leaf was falling ever so slowly, I think, is because I was so young.
Mm-hmm.
And and that was kind of the message. That's what I took from it, but maybe somebody far wiser in these things could tell me more. But I'll just leave it there. And I'll get back in line. I did have a few other points I wanted to make
Yeah,
with you, but
I
I'll get back.
appreciate you going back in line because we do have a bunch of hands up. So I
Okay, thank you
I
so
want
much.
to, I don't know that I'm going to give you a new insight, but what I'm going to do is reaffirm your insight. I think that you're, and I've done like like help people interpret their dreams. I've helped myself interpret dreams, and I overcame challenges in my life from doing that. So I have some experience looking at symbolic stuff, and I think you're dead on with your symbolism of the leaf falling is that, and it logically like jives with what I presented today, which is we come from some higher power that created, gave us not life, but gave us sentience, right? I think life evolved, but sentience and the ability to make non-deterministic decisions is what makes life really meaningful, right? It's because that gives us autonomy to be ourselves. If we were just following the laws of physics and not making any meaningful decisions, that's not a meaningful life anymore. We're just, we're robots basically. And so I think you were seeing, how you fit into the world at a young age, and maybe you didn't understand it then, but now you do understand it, and you're seeing how you fit into the world, and that you're one piece of a bigger ecosystem, a bigger sort of um, community, if you will. So if you put your hand down and then back up, Ariel, you'll get right back into line. And Jean, you got back into line again quickly. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, what was your question you were asking me?
Oh, I think you said you had more you wanted to say after your first one.
Oh, I had some notes. Um, I think I might have said, oh,
You might have covered everything already, in which case you
I
don't
did.
you don't need to go. It's just your turn if you want to.
Yeah, okay. Well, basically, one of the notes was, um, first of all, it's common in nature for things to events and things to repeat themselves. So I call that the repetition factor. And the thing is that the way I look at reincarnation, even though I did have this experience of remembering my death, and it was under very unusual circumstances. I've never shared it with anybody. I'm not about to now, but it's very unusual. My imagination couldn't have come up with something like that. And it was a Buddhist, I was a Buddhist when I died, but I basically wasn't a Buddhist at that time, or, didn't know anything about Buddhism. Um, so, and anyway, and then I also, when I did become a Buddhist, maybe many decades later, when they did the singing, I knew that singing, and I was crying a lot. But anyway, the idea, the way the Middle Way School of Buddhism looks at reincarnation, the idea is in this life to make an imprint that will influence future rebirth, and different people are going to take that, reincarnation in different ways. To me, it's just that the repetition factor, one wants to use that creatively so that, one can in the future in some form or some way help suffering sentient creatures. And some of the stuff you said about, I guess the Stoic influence is really interesting. Some of the stuff you said about suffering, one of my big interests, and I believe a lack in the way Buddhism is, again, this is a middle way school, not Zen. The way that's even worse, not even worse, but I don't want to go there. But it's helping some people. But the way the material is presented is it's one of the Four Noble Truths, is the truth of suffering. Without the truth of suffering, without the suffering, there couldn't be what they call the great compassion. And that is a contrived way of using one's functioning. Actually, as my teacher just said recently, it's not contrived, but it kind of is. If you ever studied ancient alchemy, it's the materials of the body are, reorganized in a form that makes the drops, what they call the drops of bodhicitta, at the Great Compassion. And so I just want to mention that. And then as far as the soul needs to be developed, it just doesn't happen. In terms of being happy and making other people happy, because of the knowledge obstruction, that deed can't be complete, because the child that's within oneself that never developed will creatively do anything to not experience the truth of suffering with not one's own suffering. And I believe in going very small, experiencing small uncomfortable feelings. So I guess that's about, as far as absorbing others' negativity, generally speaking, a person won't do it. And the final thing I want to say is I do have a question about, you seem to, I don't know about believe, but you seem to have the impression that the presentation you gave will change people. I don't think I tried to change myself for several decades and really dedicated myself to working on myself. And the change now it's more rapid, but the change has come very, very slow. It's almost next to impossible to break out of the knowledge obstruction and one's creative conditioning that one did as a child to not experience uncomfortable feelings. And it does involve a lot of lying to oneself, a lot of false ideas. And I just don't think people change that easily. So I appreciate the spirit in which you're giving the presentation. I think it's very, very, I feel it, it's very beautiful. But I'm getting the impression from you that you seem to believe it's going to really affect other people that profoundly. And I don't have that. It's so difficult to do that I just think that could be possibly, I'd look at the knowledge obstruction along that angle. When I think I can change people myself, in ways that I'm not even able to change myself.
Try to finish your thoughts, Gene.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Gene, I only think it's going to affect people who want to be the best versions of themselves, to seek truth and to be fair. If someone comes into this presentation with a closed mind and says, this guy can't teach me anything, like there's nothing I need to learn other than what I already know, and I'm perfect the way I am, and nothing can make me a better human being. I'm perfect just the way I am, and I can't improve anymore from here. That person's never going to learn. I agree with you. That's a what's called a fixed mindset, not a growth mindset. If someone comes in saying, hey, this being the best version of myself, seeking truth and being fair sounds like a good idea. I want to do that. We in the FTI as a community are really good at helping each other do that.
Yeah.
And it's not me teaching everybody, it's us teaching each other. And we're a peer mentorship kind of community. So for the people who really want to grow and develop, like we can help people get to heaven, right? We can help people get to maybe not to heaven, but closer to heaven than they are today. And people can progress as quickly as they will let themselves progress. You can break out of that conditioning you had as a child. And we do all have conditioning throughout our lives, not just in childhood, but in adulthood and, in teenage years, all of it. And they're chains. And we can free ourselves from those chains, learn the lessons we need to, but only if our mind is open that we're capable of learning those things. And we strive to make fairness and truth the things that we're seeking rather than trying to be right. So I do agree with you. The knowledge obstruction is real. And what I'm saying is not trivial. It's not easy. But I like to say the only things worth going after are the hard things. The easy things aren't really worth going after. And yes, this is hard, but it is the most rewarding thing you'll find in your life, to follow those five intentions and be your best self. There's nothing more rewarding than being your best self, increasing happiness and decreasing harm.
I would agree with that part. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Carrie, how are you?
I am doing really well. Thank you very much. So Frank posted a critique in the chat, and I was just kind of, you were talking about alternative points of view. So I just kind of wanted to walk through this and see what you thought. So the first thing, if I were trying to be critical, would be, all right, is the data false? So if there's 1,700 studies, I find it hard to believe that all of them are bad, right?
Yeah,
That's a
that
pretty
would be pretty unfathomable, right?
right?
So
So even if the critiques it's too bad he's not here. I was kind of hoping he would actually address them and you get a chance to work some of this out, but I guess
yeah,
not.
work it
Even
out
if
even without him, Carrie.
yeah, yeah.
So,
But even if they're asking leading stuff, I mean, unless he's just feeding the kids everything, which would
right.
again, I'm gonna, principle of charity. I'll assume that's not the case. So I think the data, there's something going on there, that's for sure. Next way, thing would be, is it conventionally explainable? And I'm not seeing anything there. Plenty of other
Yeah.
people kind of left going, I don't know, sure. Um, but then it's like, okay, so what could be possible explanations? And this is the part where I think when people just say reincarnation, they lump a whole bunch of baggage in that needs to be teased apart a little bit. Like there's this idea of this linear continuity of perspective, because I have a perspective that it's picked up and moved into somebody else. And then after a certain amount of time, it's picked up and moved into somebody else, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there's a distinct possibility that, at least from what we're talking about, time may not be linear or have that same kind of continuity. Like, why couldn't you and I be the same spirit or mind at different places at the same time? Right? Hi.
Sorry.
No worries. Always a joy uh, to see your kids. They seem so happy.
They are very
Um,
happy.
yeah. And you seem like a very attentive father, which I love.
I try to be.
Um,
I'm sorry, I don't mean to not pay enough attention to
no,
you, but
no, it's fine.
this young lady does capture my attention a lot, but I am
Yeah.
listening to you.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, I mean, because it seems like we could say, maybe there's one consciousness, maybe there's multiple consciousnesses, maybe there's an infinite number of consciousnesses, maybe it is linear, maybe it's not linear. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff. There's also the idea of maybe, I think Arthur C. Clarke came up with this idea, I think the first time I saw it in Childhood's End, this idea that maybe people can pick up on like past experiences or future experiences as echoes through time. So maybe it's not that they were that individual, but somehow that individual's experience is conserved somehow, somewhere, and we can tap into that. So there's a few different options there, and I guess the next step would be to try to figure out how to weed those or wean those down or prune them and say, well, it's probably not this,
Hmm.
right? Because then we got like many universes to consider and all of this stuff. But anyway, great job, and I'll stop here and come around next time.
Thank you. It sounds like, Carrie, you're less skeptical than you usually are. So,
Well,
which is cool.
yeah, I mean, what am I going to say, right? That it's
Yeah,
just
no, I
all
get it.
BS? I
And
mean,
no,
but
I
I
mean, yes, all 1700, which is kind of what Frank actually criticized Ian Stevenson's work, but even if you criticize his work, what about all the other PIs, right?
right,
And there are many, many other ones. Did they have a conversation with Ian? Probably most of them did. Does having a conversation with someone mean you're going to be a zealot that's going to make up data to validate their point? Probably not, right?
right,
So,
yeah,
yeah, so I appreciate your intellectual honesty in approaching the subject.
thank you.
That's really, it's great to see, and I expect no less of you, having known you for a long time now. So, um, but as far as like an infinite number of consciousnesses, I think there are. I think there's an infinite number of spirits like in the universe, and we're all evolving, right? And we're all at different levels of evolution, and we're all hopefully trying to evolve. Some people are not, right? The Zoom bombers are probably not progressing spiritually at the fastest rate right now. Now with time, maybe they'll right themselves and start learning and growing from their mistakes. And, I did, right? So I have hope that they will too someday. And I think that there's no time like now to start evolving, right? And to start, trying to seek truth and be fair and try to help other people and be a better human being, right? If we're all trying to be good human beings and we surround ourselves with other people trying to be good human beings, then, as we grow in numbers, we grow in strength.
Mhm.
And so that's part of what the FTI community is about, is growing in numbers with peers that want to be, positive influences on each other. And part of that includes, challenging each other, which I appreciate. You also challenge me a lot. And that's important. If we don't have people challenging each other in this community, we're never going to get to the actual truth. We have to challenge each other to get to the truth, and we have to understand each other's perspective, because that's where we learn the most. Like I said, we learn far more by listening with empathy than we do by saying you're wrong and I'm right and this is why.
Well, human logic is pretty flawed. It needs constant correction
Yep,
from nature.
agreed. And that's to and I forget her name, Jean's point, like we're all stuck in these paradigms that we grew up with, always believing certain things. It wasn't until my mid 30s that I realized that my dad could be wrong about stuff. Literally my mid 30s. And he was always so self-confident in everything he said. And I learned in my mid 30s, nope, sometimes he's wrong, right? Sometimes he has a misunderstanding. And it's because we would get into these deep philosophical debates, and sometimes I would ask questions with empathy, and I'd realize he didn't have an argument that I could follow that made logical sense. So I just said, I'm more likely to be right. Now he might be right still, but like I'm more likely to be right on that. So that said, thank you, Carrie and Deborah.
Hi, so I wanted to take a moment and look at this from an actual scientific perspective, because we were talking about what's real.
Mm-hmm.
And presumably, what's real is something that we can point to in space and time and say, this is where this particle is. And that we can predict that will be there, and we can predict what it's going to do next. But what science has found out, which is why I'm so glad I'm living in this time, although coming in a little later would have been better, is that we're starting to realize that there actually is no such thing. That this idea that a particle, I'm not, by the way, I'm not a scientist. I'm explaining it from a lay perspective, and I hope it makes sense. But what they're saying now is that this particle can be in a multitude of places, an infinite number of places and times. And it doesn't, what's the best way to describe it? It doesn't show up in a specific place and time until we've looked at it and quantified it, which means reality is something that we actually create. It's not this idea of, well, I mean, you can see the tree there, and so that the tree is real, so that's not a question, is actually not necessarily true. And I find that it's kind of there because we kind of all agree that that's going to be a tree. But that doesn't actually mean that there's a tree there. It means that we've seen it, we've quantified it, and we've decided that's what it is. So I don't know if I'm doing a great job explaining this, but it does suggest that as we continue to explore the universe, we're finding out that there are an infinite number of universes, an infinite number of conscience, yeah, whatever. I can't, for some reason, I can't say the word right. Consciences.
Hard to say, don't
Yeah.
worry. We know what you
Thank
mean.
you. And I appreciate that.
It's
And
hard
I
to
was
say.
actually an English major, so don't even ask me why I'm stumbling on that word.
Don't worry, like we will stumble, my friend. So
Which suggests that the things that we think we know and that we've defined, this is reality, now we can talk about things around it, that's not even reality. So I find that extremely exciting, because it sounds to me like science and physics is kind of veering toward metaphysics because of what we've actually observed, which is things aren't as observable and definable as we think they are. So I'm very excited about that. So I know this is not exactly on topic, but it kind of is, because it's the idea of tearing apart the idea of reality,
yeah,
and allowing it to be something that in fact we create with our
Deborah,
consciousness.
first of all, you're describing it very well.
Oh, thank you.
I do think that it's a misunderstanding. And what I mean by that is I don't think we create reality. Objective reality is there. We are observers of it. What is also true is that the reality that we observe may change because of someone else's free will before we observe it next. And so there's always this, and that's what, and we had another event on the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. We had another one on the double slit experiment. And I showed how you can actually make very logical sense of both the double slit experiment, which confuses the heck out of every scientist,
Hmm.
and we made very logical sense out of it by simply acknowledging that we have free will and the ability to make non-deterministic decisions, and that once you observe something, then it has to be nailed down. But before you observe it, there's an uncertainty because someone else's free will could change it before we observe it. And so, yes, its position is not 100% determinable because of that, because it could still be changed by something or someone's free
For
will.
someone else. Yeah,
Yeah,
so we're almost talking about the same thing. I mean, you've got a slightly different flavoring
correct.
from the one that I have, but we are
Yep.
talking about my reality is a little more nebulous, perhaps, the way I've described it, than the reality that you're talking about. But in fact, we are saying that what we've taken as true for our whole lives isn't necessarily how the universe actually works.
Well, I think though, some people throw out the idea of objective reality, right? The postmodernists say there is no objective reality. We create reality in our consciousness. And
Yeah.
I don't think that's accurate because why are we all experiencing the same reality if each of our consciousnesses are coming up with this reality simultaneously? Why is it all in sync? We all seem to be in the same Zoom meeting here. We're all having the same conversation. So how do you explain that unless there's an objective reality that we're a part of? Now, I don't know what you're going to say next. I can't predict that with 100% certainty. So there's always this uncertainty about what is it you're going to say next. And there's always this, and that's part of what makes life interesting, quite frankly, is we don't know what's going to come up next, but we can get better at predicting the future. And as we're better at predicting the future, we can then learn to coexist with reality and navigate the future more accurately. I would argue critical thinking is all about creating models of the future and how to predict it and how to navigate it in the way that increases happiness and decreases harm for everyone. If we can do that, boom, kudos. Like life is good.
I'll say one more thing and then I will
Sure.
cede the what's the seat to someone else, the microphone. Number one, I would say a lot of the reason that we see the same things is because, in a sense, we've agreed that these are what they are. From the time I was little, my mother showed me that this was green. And when I pointed to something, she said, that's a tree, or whatever. So I'm saying a lot of how we view the world is actually because you've all agreed that that's what it is. Right. And I've been raised in an environment where people have told me what it is. So that I'm going to say that. And the other thing I'm going to say is I don't know if what I see is the same thing that you see. When I look at green, you can look at it and say green because you grew up and knew that was green. But for all I know, your green could be blue to me, and my green is green to me. So I'm just saying that it's not quite, I don't think, as cut and dried as what you're saying. And that's just my opinion, and I'm throwing it out there for fun.
Yeah, yeah. No, I've had that thought too, that your green might be my red, right? But actually these things are observable. The wavelengths of light are consistent for the different colors, and people having red blue color blindness are colorblind in the same types of objects because of their color blindness. So there's a lot of correlation between what different people are seeing in that they're tied together in an objective reality. Now, could you interpret it to be different than other people? Yeah, but like tree leaves are generally green, right? Like, and a tree leaf that's not green, we can say that's not a green tree leaf. And so that's chromatic, chromatic. But so all I would say is there's a lot of logical consistency. That's why the scientific method works. That's why experiments are repeatable because we have predictable elements of the universe, and those predictable elements are generally not human, and that's why science has done such a poor job of understanding people, quite frankly, because people aren't predictable. Like we're very unpredictable because we make non-deterministic decisions, and the sooner science acknowledges that, the sooner science will progress by acknowledging that we can make, irrational decisions and we can make and that's acknowledged, but that we make unpredictable decisions sometimes. And, that someone was talking about how, like where science is and where it can go. I think science largely doesn't look at things that it vilifies, like reincarnation and other stuff that, anything non-physicalist is basically considered laughable by scientists. And until science opens its mind to those things, and I think Gene was talking about acid trips, right? Acid trips, from what people have described to me, they're going into the spiritual realm, right? They're going into this non-physical realm and they're observing things that are not physically observable. And there are consistent stories of people that have gone on acid trips that see the same things and creatures and experiences. And there's probably some rhyme or reason to it. I've never done one, so I don't know how to tie it all together other than to say, I think something's going on there. It's not just, all a bunch of made up stories, right? So, yeah, I probably digressed a little bit. Does that make sense, Deborah?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself.
Yeah,
It does, but I'm still going to be a little I'm still going to be a little more loose about it than you are.
that's okay. You don't
I'm
have
just
to agree
saying.
with me.
No, so I
Part
understood
of the fun
everything
of
you
life is
said, and I'm not.
disagreeing. Yeah,
No, I
yeah,
understand what you said. I'm not
yeah,
entirely disagreeing. I'm just saying I think there's something, I'm going to call it mystical, which is really just metaphysical. I
yeah.
think there's a mystical level there that still needs tapping into, that it's not quite what you're saying.
Yeah. No, I
So we'll
agree
see.
with you. There's a mystical part. So we agree on that. For me, the mystical part is the free will. And free will, when you add free will in, which scientists deny that we have libertarian free will, make non-deterministic decisions, once you add that component in, the things that confuse the heck out of scientists, like the double slit experiment and the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, someone was kind of alluding to before without naming it for what it is, these things suddenly make all the sense in the world once you add, libertarian free will or the ability to make non-deterministic decisions. So you might like our other videos on those topics, because I presented on double slit experiment and
Mm,
Heisenberg uncertainty principle and other events. So
sounds like I will. Thank you.
cool. No problem. Thank you. Bonnie, how are you?
Um, okay, if in your theory, if you're correct that we're all evolving spiritually, then how do you explain devolvement? Because you did mention that. And to me, if that's like happening or true, it would be momentarily, like that could be lifetimes, or it could be part of a lifetime, but it's still momentarily, because if you're still always evolving, it's just errors that you're making along the way. How do you address that?
I I mean, when you say how do I address it, what part of it is confusing? I guess the way that I look at it is, if you think about it as a line, right, where the absolute most high up you could go is God, right? Like a being that is, essentially perfect and infinitely, capable, not capable, but infinitely wise. And then you go down to the like least wise thing that is like absolutely self-destructive and destructive to everything around it. There's also everything in between, and this is an infinite line. It's not a finite line, but it's an infinite line where you can get absolutely horribly destructive, or you can get absolutely wise and always making the right decisions. um, we're all at somewhere on that line. And if we're wise, we're going to move upward. And if we're unwise, we're going to move downward. And eventually, I think everybody will be on the up and up and move upward. But, some people are going to go down quite a bit before they start moving up, and they need to learn their lessons. But
But
when you
that's
move down, you suffer, right? And so when you suffer enough that you're going to keep an open mind to, maybe I should be fair and seek truth rather than seek to be right about, and hit your head against the wall. Like that's it's different spirits evolve at different paces, and some move two steps forward, one step back, some move one step forward, two steps back. It's
and
all up to our individual free will where we how we evolve or devolve.
and I do understand that, but what I'm saying is, if overall we're still evolving, making mistakes or devolvement is still moving forward, because you have to learn from those mistakes.
Well, if you're not learning from the mistakes, you're not moving forward, right? If you keep making the mistakes and you keep making bigger and worse mistakes, then you're moving backwards.
But
Now, if
maybe,
you're learning from
but,
the mistakes and you're evolving, then yes, you're moving forward.
but
Like it's
maybe,
okay to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. The question is, are we learning from those mistakes? And if we're not, and we keep causing more and more harm to the people around us, well, that's not a good direction to go
yeah, but maybe the only way that we learn to move forward is by
in.
going backward at times. And that is actually,
Maybe. Maybe, but I don't think going backward is necessary. I think it's optional. We get to choose whether or not we learn. Now, I think to the point that Gene made about like our what I would call our misunderstandings about the world, and the Buddhists say there are three evils is greed, anger, and misunderstandings. And that's my polite way of putting it. My former Buddhist monk friend called it delusions, but I think misunderstandings is a more polite translation. And if we try to clarify our misunderstandings and seek truth and we seek to be fair, I think we're evolving, because we're learning those lessons. When we refuse to learn the lessons, then we devolve or we
I,
stay in the same place.
yeah, I don't totally agree with you there because I
That's
think
okay.
that mistakes are necessary in order to learn what we
I didn't
don't want.
disagree with that. Yeah. And I didn't disagree with that. I do think mistakes are necessary to learn. All I'm saying is don't keep making the same mistake over and over and over again. If
But
you
maybe,
do that, then you're not learning.
or you haven't learned yet.
Yeah, exactly. And you'll have an infinite number of chances, but why not start learning now? Because you'll be happier and you'll make other people happier and you'll reduce harm. So let's all start learning now. And so that's all I'm saying with this whole presentation is let's all start learning now. And let's be open that we might be wrong about stuff because confirmation bias is real and it's very strong in almost everybody. Only
That's,
people that are actively seeking to combat confirmation bias have low confirmation bias. And there's very precious few of us doing that. And that we had a whole nother event on confirmation bias, I think I mentioned. So it's probably a good one to watch for people interested in the topic.
That would be the knowledge obstruction, and it's
Yeah.
next to impossible, literally not impossible, but next to impossible to do anything about. And people are very deluded about that, as I have been myself my whole life. And there's
I
not
will
enough teaching about that, and people have no idea of the blind spot and how blind it does make a person. And everything feels right. It feels flowing. It can feel alive even, and that knowledge obstruction is still there.
I will politely disagree with that, Gene. I think it's a very solvable problem. If your goal is to seek truth, not to be right, you can get unobstructed very quickly and easily by conditioning yourself to value truth and finding new truths more than value being right. In the beginning, it is very uncomfortable, it's very awkward, and it takes a lot of humility. But if you start down that path of saying, look, I'm wrong, but when I admit I'm wrong with good judgment, I'm immediately right again. I'm more right than I was before. When you have that mindset, you can clear out those knowledge obstructions one after another, and it accelerates as you start doing it.
If one is not, I mean, to me, I don't, to me, if I said anything like that, I would consider myself to be speaking from a blind spot. I'm on a, I don't think you understand, I didn't explain myself very well.
So you
And
explained it well, Gene. I just think that we're in like we have a different mindset. I've seen my mistakes so many times and I've acknowledged them. And right now, like if you tell me I'm wrong about something logically and I'm really wrong about it, I'll be like, wow, Gene, that's a good point. Like I'm wrong. And here now I'm right. So I'll give an example. I gave a presentation or I gave a reference to the Milgram experiments. And I learned in the middle of the presentation that I was wrong about the Milgram experiments. Well, I just said, look, I
saying,
looked it up. I'm wrong.
sorry, I didn't mean to. The knowledge obstruction, as I'm referring to it, is not the same as seeing one's mistakes. I've seen my mistakes and had remorseful conscience many, many, many times, and for the last several 50 years. But that's not the same as the knowledge obstruction. I'm
What
just
do you
speaking
mean by a knowledge obstruction?
difficult to explain it. That's why I think they don't focus on it that much. It's basically one thinks and feels that one's perception, one's thinking, in order for it to think, there has to be subject and object, right? And there can't be thinking unless subject and object. Just like when I'm looking at something, there's subject and object. But when one perceives one's thinking to be ultimately true, there's no subject and object in that sense. It takes over, like speaking metaphorically, like the devil, and it's invisible. It's very interesting. It's very hard to understand. I've been a Buddhist for all these decades, and I never even they don't even mention it that much because I think it's so difficult for to focus from that angle. They focus from the afflictionist angle,
I
which you
mean,
seem.
the way that I interpreted it when you first described it is as misunderstandings, which is one of the three Buddhist evils, which is, trying to overcome our misunderstandings, which is essentially acknowledging when we're wrong.
I hear
Um,
it's wise, but that's not what I meant by it. I just
okay,
wanted to ask people, but there's no way. I'm not that articulate on the subject. It's
no
just something
problem.
you to be aware of. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Jenna, how are you?
Thanks, Garrett. Um, I'm fine, thanks. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for
Uh,
asking.
my question would be, I tried to write it just to collect my thoughts. So, assuming the reality of reincarnation, that the soul integrates past experiences and unlearned lessons that are accumulated across lifetimes in a present body, do you think that this constant cycle of rebirth and the accumulated weight of the burden of the past could impede some people's spiritual progress because our souls became exhausted and hence could also hinder some people's ability to be learning the lessons from the past. And I wonder if these deterministic factor could be a justification to why, or people could use it as a justification to why some people behave and live their lives poorly.
No, I don't think that souls become exhausted. The soul isn't physical, so I don't think it can be exhausted. Like we're always making decisions. Now, I like to joke that the only people that have free will are those of us that believe we do, because if someone doesn't believe they have free will, they're just going to do what's easiest in any given situation, and very often that'll lead them down a bad path. Now, if you acknowledge that you have free will and you want to exercise that free will and you want to be conscious to make the best decisions you can, to seek truth, to be fair, to be the best version of yourself, and you actively choose to take that difficult road. And that is the more difficult road. It's much easier to just keep making mistakes. Now you suffer more, but it's easier. The hard road is doing that introspective work and uncovering your misunderstandings and, having the humility to learn from them when you take that harder road, and I think everybody is capable of doing it. I don't think we get weighed down from the past experiences. That's why we forget our lives from the past, right? If we were always remembering all our past life memories, I think we'd be very weighed down in the past, and we would be probably stuck on a lot of those memories, especially like thinking about our death. So I think that's probably part of why, even in these past life memories that kids have, they forget them in adolescence so that they can move on, right? And there's probably reasons that some of these people remember their past lives. I don't necessarily know what those reasons are, although I will say for the guy that uncovered who his murderer was, I think he was basically, making fairness come about. He was catching the guy that killed him and got away with it up until he was reincarnated. So I think that was about fairness. Now, other people, I don't know why some people remember past life experiences and others don't. But I will say, I don't think we're weighed down. I think we all have the conscious choice of either evolving, staying where we are, or devolving. And most people, I think, stay where they are because of confirmation bias. They're stuck in bad ideas. And we have what we call the FTI Credo that we just put together that is intended to help people have a mindset of, let's get unstuck from our bad ideas and let's evolve and learn. So
Garrett, most people do actually. Most people believe they have free will. I don't know where you got the idea that most people believe they don't have free will. Almost
most
everybody.
most people actually believe in compatibilism. So they think that they have free will, but they think that the laws of physics determine what they're going to do with absolute certainty, which is at least most philosophers believe that. Um,
Philosophers are a different category. They're not most people. In fact,
okay.
anything.
Well, if you have a
Derek,
study that shows what actual like average people believe, I was unable to find one, so I don't know how we could even venture to guess what most people believe without.
Hundreds and hundreds of people all day long. People believe they have free will. That's just built into the way we, even you probably are processing information. You're not thinking every moment that you have free will.
So most people that I know that I've had this conversation with, and I've been talking about free will since I was literally 12 years old. So, most people that I know, yes, they would say, yes, I have free will. But if you go into the details, they would also say the only thing predicting the future is the laws of physics, and they're physicalists that believe that only the laws of physics exist, and that the only thing that determines the future are the laws of physics, which is actually not
Right?
coherent, not a coherent version of free will.
You mean causality? Everything's related to.
No, different from causality. So that's a common misconception. So I understand why you're saying that. Sam Harris confuses causality with um, determinism. But causality, you can have a non-deterministic cause and effect, which is what I believe reality is. There's non-deterministic cause and effect with free will. Like when our spirit makes a decision, it has a non-deterministic cause and effect. Now, cause and effect are very real and they exist. And so yeah, I don't think anyone could disprove cause and effect. There are people who tried, but I feel like it's kind of nonsense to say there's no cause and effect. But
Toby,
you don't
just a
want to
reminder, it's 10 to.
Oh, thank you. So we have a bunch of hands up. So let's go to Ariel. And Ariel, I forgot to say thank you for sharing your experience before. I really appreciate your being vulnerable in that way. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I just thought that it was appropriate to
It
the
was.
discussion,
It was.
and might help others to maybe come out if they've had a similar experience. Um, so I had a few problems with the presentation, not big ones. I guess the first one that I questioned was the whole idea that we have free will, and maybe I misinterpreted your view, but what I got from was that we are self-determined, and that we kind of determine our heaven or hell or suffering or whatever to a large extent, and I disagree with that. I think we have free will. I think we have both free will, but a lot is determined, and a lot of our options are predetermined in a lot of different ways. I think there's levels of that determination depending on where we are, and the outermost being the whole fact that we're limited by being a human being.
Mhm.
So that was the one thing, and the other one was the slide on hell. So I was born into a family of Christians. But I became a Buddhist later. My family was very open to the idea of, find your own path. And just don't get involved with a cult. So, so I became a Buddhist. I'm now agnostic, but at any point, Buddhism spoke to me, and I think what it taught me a lot about Christianity. And I've said this before on other platforms when we discuss, different religions, that it's always a good idea that when you're born into a certain type of belief system or thinking, it's a good idea to switch it up and try a different way of looking at things, if for the only reason to kind of criticize or get a better point of looking at where you came from and whether it's appropriate, or you really truly believe it, or you were just put into that mindset.
Yes.
So I think that Buddhism, the problem with hell is that I think that there's so much suffering right here and now in purgatory that we really don't need a hell and we don't need a heaven, because I guess my belief is that death is really a reset, and it's a reset from this, right? So I don't know that any of us know that there's suffering when we die. Obviously, there's suffering just before it because we're probably losing something of what we know of ourselves and what we knew and what we loved, and maybe not so much suffering because we're losing something that we hated or disliked about existence as it is here as a human being. But that was my take on it. So I just don't see any point, I guess, in hell because I think there's enough suffering here, and I think the purpose of hell really is a control mechanism, um, to make people behave or else kind of thing, a fear management, if you will. So
Yeah.
that's my take on that. And then the other thing,
Try to, if we can keep it to that, because we have a lot of hands up and I have a lot
yeah.
to say in response, and we only have 6 minutes left.
And I
So,
guess the last point that I was going to bring up is good and bad. Be good, correct yourself. And I guess, again, I think we're limited as far as humans and how much we can correct ourselves depending on what we're given mentally. And then, good people, somebody could be a very good person, an ethical person, but they die horribly, you know. So really bad stuff happens to really good people.
oh, I've
So
seen it.
there's the
Yeah, I
flaw in
know
that
that.
design.
Yeah.
Um,
So
yeah.
that again, karma doesn't say that nothing bad happens to good people, right? It doesn't say that. It just says that bad things that happen are an opportunity to learn. It doesn't mean that just because you're a good person, nothing bad will happen to you. Nothing prevents you from having anything bad happen to you. You just have to be resilient to the bad things that happen and learn from them. So the first thing I would encourage you to watch the videos on free will and determinism, and then the next one on the strength of the will, because it sounds like you believe that there's a lot of influences that limit what we're capable of. And I think I made a pretty good argument that we are far more in control of our destiny than we are out of control of our destiny. And even our current like happiness, with enough runway. The second thing is about heaven and hell. I didn't hear you disagree with me on anything. I was saying heaven and hell are right here on earth. There is enough hell on earth to go around. I don't believe in a metaphysical hell. I think hell is living your life in a way that you keep making the same mistakes that cause you harm and you keep doing them over and over again right here on earth. So I agree with you. I think hell is here on earth. And there's that great 80s song about heaven is a place on earth. So I think heaven is also, a place on earth, although I forgot to give the Rumi quote, which is something like, I'm paraphrasing it, when I die, I will be born with the angels. When I die with amongst the angels, I will become something that you cannot imagine. And I do think that there are higher life forms that if we are a really, really good human being, we evolve to be that higher life form. And so I think that an existence without suffering is possible ultimately, but I don't think that it's probably not going to happen in this life. But if it does, then we probably get to something better. So that said, I want to go through hands. So Carrie, quickly, and we
Yep.
have 3 minutes, so we probably won't get to everybody.
I'll keep this really brief. First thing, mystical, I think, is a secular placeholder for God of the Gaps. And if you talk to physicists, a lot of them aren't mystics. So there's something to be said for exploring more if that's the answer you come up with. Um, this is my question though. Is the idea of like, let's assume all of everything you've said is absolutely 100% true.
Hmm.
What is it that we're specifically supposed to learn? How and what's the mechanism? Because evolution is a physical mechanism, right? I mean, we can understand that fine because there's
Yeah.
continuity. But when it comes to this, where there's a break, where most of us are not aware of the previous lessons, it kind of puts us in a lurch. It's like we're passing a test when you don't know what you have to study.
Right. And I think we all inherently know what's right and what's not, and what's fair and what's not in our hearts. Like if we look at any given situation and we trust our gut, which most of us like have a little trouble trusting our gut. And I've trusted it at times and I've not trusted it others, and I've fallen by the wayside, and then I've come back around to getting much better at trusting my gut now. Um, if we trust our gut, and I would argue it's like a combination of heart and mind, and I have a presentation on this, but anyway, what are we supposed to learn? I think it's following the five intentions. It's as simple as that. And it took hundreds of hours of conversations with philosophical friends, and we all kind of came up with these 5 rules that essentially describe how you can live a better life and increase happiness and decrease harm for the people in our lives. And so I think it comes down to following those 5 intentions. If we do that, and we're open that we might be wrong about stuff because we are all wrong about stuff. And that's to me the way I interpreted Gene's comment is that we have to overcome our misunderstandings and our confirmation bias and other biases, by admitting we're wrong and growing and learning and getting closer to truth and being more fair, we evolve.
Okay, so that's more about living well from in different situations than this maybe than more about a lesson.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we live well in those different situations by learning the lessons of what doesn't work well, right? And that was where someone said, well, we have to make those mistakes. We have to suffer those times to learn the lessons.
Gotcha.
Well, some people, I like to say, smart people learn from their own mistakes, wise people learn from other people's mistakes. And if you look at it that way, some of us don't have to suffer to learn from someone else's mistake because we see that person screwed up. I watched Jeffrey Skilling go to jail. I'm not going to be the next Enron, right? Like, I'm not going to cook the books. So I won't have to learn that mistake myself. We don't have to learn every mistake ourselves. We can learn from other people's mistakes. Um, and as far as mystical being a secular placeholder for the God of the gaps, I'm going to do another. I love how you said that and how you entertained that it might be useful. I do think that actually I can make a good logical argument that the God of the gaps is actually a defensible stance. And I
Ah,
know that sounds crazy, but we'll save that for another night, when I talk about the difference between science and what I call non-science. So, and that goes back to Gödel's incompleteness theorem. So we'll do that another night. I think I presented on it a long time ago, but I don't think we have that video anymore, so I'm going to repeat it eventually. So,
thanks.
yep. Mandy.
Hi. Um, there's reincarnation. There's 5,000 odd years of study in the East about it. The science of yoga, you can sit in stillness and you connect to source and you can connect to your record so you know if you reincarnated or not. So we don't always have to wait for the scientists, like the Western scientist. If you
Yeah.
just sit with yourself and go to that point of know yourself. And the other piece of it is that once you're sitting in stillness and you know what you've done and what you're here to learn, then when someone does annoy you or you want to get back to them, you know that this is a moment to turn the other cheek. Because in previous lifetime, you were even worse to this person.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, that's all I wanted to share. So I think pushing people to sit still, learning from a young age in schools, sitting still and knowing your own self of who you are, that you are a part of source energy. You're here to learn more about yourself. I think it'll change your perspective for everybody.
Yeah, that was famously written on the Oracle of Delphi is know thyself. First know thyself. And I think knowing yourself is super important, Manny. And that's all of what I was talking about requires us having self-knowledge, knowing our own biases and trying to overcome them proactively, using our will to try to spiritually evolve and be a better version of ourselves.
Yeah,
And the 5 intentions define what I mean by better in a very secular, objective way.
yeah.
So I
And the
don't
more
think
you
it's
sit with,
spirituality
yeah,
required.
the more you sit in silence, in absolute stillness and start connecting to source energy. And it's not easy because it's very difficult to get over ourselves.
Yeah, I
So
agree with that, Mandy. And I also
thank you.
I also agree that that's one way of coming to spirituality is by directly experiencing it. I will say I meditated a lot and I never had those like epiphanies like Ariel talked about. Like
Oh,
my meditation was very peaceful and I was able to come to, knowledge and wisdom and I was able to get peace in my mind and I can clear my mind very well. But like I didn't see Akashic records and see my past life before me. I didn't have those metaphysical experiences. So for some people that don't have those experiences, learning about the science is really helpful.
yeah. I think that because in the West, the meditation piece has been so diluted,
I
it's
was
not
trained
the,
by a Thai meditation expert. He was a meditation specialist. So, I
yeah,
didn't
no,
Western
there is
meditation.
ways. Anyways, thank you
Yeah,
so much.
yeah, no problem. I also went to a Buddhist retreat where I learned about meditation, and it was all, Eastern people who grew up in the East learning meditation and Buddhism. Um, Jenna, you're the last one.
Uh, yeah, thanks, Garrett. It's just short. It's
Yeah.
just more of a comment on what you said earlier. So, like the soul being exhausted. I think I draw the logic from the some people say that their soul was crushed from a certain experience or circumstances in their lives, and like the feeling of being overwhelmed by their past traumas and unresolved issues. I think they are real. So that's the reason why
Yes.
I think the
I
yeah, I kind of
apologize.
connect it with the reincarnation. But yeah, yeah, that's the only reason why I come up with the idea. But I think I agree as well that we have like our free will in order to change what is it in the present. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jenna. And if that's what you meant by exhaustion, then I will agree that there, but what I would phrase it a little differently. I don't see that as the soul being exhausted. I will say I believe that's when we're stuck on not learning a lesson that we should be learning, where we had this lesson that we didn't learn in a past life, and we're still trying to figure out in this life, and we need to either learn it or we're going to keep suffering, right? Or people around us are going to keep suffering. There's going to be negative experiences if we don't learn that lesson. And that's where, I guess that's, you know like like that's how I would say, for people that are having, negative karma, it's because they haven't learned to absorb negativity without disappointment, which is where I say keep your hopes high and your disappointment low. It's the only way to go. If you can absorb negativity and avoid disappointment even when you experience negativity, and simply learn from that what you need to learn from it, and say, it's a preferred indifferent, as the Stoics say, and it's just something that happened to me. I'm going to say, but bird poop hit me on the head. I'm going to wipe it off and move on and have a good day anyway. Having that positive mindset helps us evolve from those things that we're stuck on. But we all have things we're stuck on, every one of us. And we all have confirmation bias, every one of us. We're all stuck in bad ideas. It's only when we realize we're stuck in bad ideas and we're actively seeking to get unstuck from them, and we actively look for reasons we're wrong, that we can actually get unstuck, and where we're listening with empathy to other people and seeing if they have better arguments than us. And if they do, we have the humility to say, you know what? This person has a better argument than me. I'm going to side with them. And there's nothing wrong with that. And so I hope that makes sense. And now if I understand what you meant by exhaustion of the soul, I would just say that's where we're stuck on some misunderstanding and we're not learning a lesson we need to learn. And what we should do is learn the lesson we need to learn.
I
Yeah,
lowered
thanks for that.
my hand because I thought you were going to end strictly at 6, but now that you've gone over, I raised my hand again so I could say
Go
what
ahead, Gene. But this is the last one. No more questions, please. I got to
I,
put my kids to bed.
I just wanted to say that um, I didn't express myself that well about it's very hard to talk about the knowledge obstruction, but in no way did what your understanding of what I said, and probably other people's understanding, is not at all what is meant by the knowledge obstruction. So in the future, it's new to me talking about it. So maybe if I ever, see any of you guys again, I'll try to be more articulate. But in no way was I talking about what you suggested I was talking about. So it's not.
So,
May I just
so
say quickly, Jean, this is Jenny.
yeah.
I sent you a private message, Jean,
Okay,
and so I thought you might be interested. Thank you again, Garrett,
I
for
didn't.
fantastic.
I didn't see it. Sorry. I'll go back if the chat.
Probably in
Yeah.
the chat. Yeah, if everybody can save the chat just in case you want to look at stuff afterwards, there may be something that you want to pay attention to there. If you go to the where is it?
Chat,
The
but I don't.
top, the three dots, and then you can say save chat. Once I close it out, you won't be able to do it, I don't think. So, and thank you all for the kind words. And just so you know, Gene, I actually looked up knowledge instruction in ChatGPT, and it basically does seem like I understood it correctly, and you described it very well. So,
Yeah, I
um,
guess express it but if it was AI, which it probably was, but that's interesting. I'm going to
Yeah.
try a message from Jenny. If you could just wait before.
Just scroll way up because it's up at the
Because
Just go to the three dots. Yeah, go to the three dots, Gene, in the upper right-hand corner of the chat.
Record your message. When you finish
Click
recording, you'll
Save
connect
chat.
or press 1 for more options.
message
Leave a callback number.
to catch it.
Oh, for the love of Pete.
Yeah, maybe both go to the Discord community and you guys can connect on Discord. So if you go to freethinkerinstitute.org, you'll
Oh,
be
here
able
I
to.
I got her name. Jenny, no.
Yeah, I have to close out. I got to put my kids to sleep. So thank you all for coming. Thanks for the great comments and conversation. And really appreciate everybody's time and attention and contribution. So thank you all. Hope that I'll see you guys next week. We do this every week on Tuesday evenings. I forgot to give the link to next week's one. I usually try to do that, but I don't have time to do it now and I got to close out. So, but hope to see you guys next week. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.